there's a particular kind of loneliness that doesn't announce itself loudly. It sits quietly in crowded rooms, behind polite smiles and measured words. It's the loneliness of never quite fitting in, not because you're unwelcome, but because something inside you feels fundamentally different. You watch others connect with ease, their laughter flowing naturally, their belonging effortless, and you wonder if you're the only one who feels like you're standing just outside the circle, close enough to see everything, but never quite close enough to truly be part of it. This isn't about rejection, it's deeper than that. It's about living with the quiet belief that you are made differently, that you see the world through a lens no one else seems to use. And while others fear being left out, you've learned to fear something else entirely, that maybe you were always meant to stand apart. It starts small, a birthday party where everyone else seems to know the unspoken rules of play, a classroom where laughter erupts over jokes you don't quite understand, a family gathering where conversations flow around you, but never quite through you. These moments don't feel catastrophic at the time. They're subtle, fleeting, easy to dismiss as coincidence or bad timing, but they accumulate, and over time they form a pattern, a quiet understanding that you exist slightly out of sync with everyone else. For some, this realization arrives early. You're the child who prefers books to playgrounds, silence to noise, depth to small talk. You're the teenager who feels oddly alienated at parties designed for connection, who watches social rituals from a distance and wonders why they feel so performative. You try to participate, you smile at the right moments, laugh when others laugh, mirror the rhythms of belonging, but inside, there's a dissonance, a feeling that you're translating a language everyone else speaks fluently, while you're still learning the grammar. And here's what makes it so isolating. You can't quite name what's wrong. There's no obvious rejection, no one is cruel. In fact, people might even like you, but liking isn't the same as understanding, and understanding isn't the same as belonging. You sense that others connect to each other in ways that feel natural, effortless, like they're all tuned to the same frequency. While you're picking up static, you begin to wonder if the problem is you, if there's something fundamentally different about the way you're wired, the way you think, the way you feel. That this belief that you are different becomes a lens through which you interpret everything. When you're not invited, it confirms what you already suspected. When you are invited, you assume it's out of politeness, not genuine desire. You start to anticipate rejection before it arrives, to brace yourself for the inevitable moment when people realize you don't quite fit, and in doing so, you begin to fulfill your own prophecy. You hold back, you edit yourself, you become careful, cautious, measured, afraid that if you reveal too much, the difference will become undeniable. But here's the paradox. The more you try to fit in, the more distant you feel, because fitting in requires a kind of surrender, a willingness to soften your edges, to blur your peculiarities, to become a version of yourself that's easier for others to understand. And for a while, this works. You learn to code switch, to perform belonging, to navigate social spaces without drawing too much attention to your difference. But the cost is invisibility. The more you conform, the less of you remains visible. And so the loneliness deepens, not because you're alone, but because even when you're with others, the truest parts of you are still hidden. There's a particular grief in this, not the loud, disruptive grief of loss, but the quiet, chronic grief of never being fully seen. You carry it with you everywhere, in conversations where you can't quite say what you mean, in friendships that feel warm but never fully intimate, in moments of celebration where you feel strangely separate from the joy around you. You wonder if anyone else feels this way, if anyone else is also performing, also translating, also pretending that belonging comes naturally. But you don't ask, because asking would mean admitting the truth, that you've always felt like an outsider, even when you're standing right in the center of the room. And over time, this feeling hardens into identity. You stop seeing it as a temporary state, something that might change with the right people, the right circumstances, the right environment. Instead, you begin to believe it's simply who you are, the outsider, the odd one, the person who doesn't quite belong. It becomes a story you tell yourself, a role you inhabit, a truth you no longer question. And in some strange way, it becomes familiar, comfortable even, because if you've always been different, then at least you know what to expect. At least you know where you stand. But beneath that familiarity, there's something else, a quiet longing, not for popularity or social success, but for something simpler, to be understood without having to explain yourself, to be accepted not in spite of your difference, but because of it, to find a space or a person where you don't have to translate, don't have to perform, don't have to shrink, where you can simply exist exactly as you are, and have that be enough. The feeling of being an outsider doesn't emerge from nowhere. It has roots, and those roots often reach deeper than we realize into early childhood, into family systems, into the very architecture of how we learned to relate to the world. To understand why some people carry this identity so deeply, we have to go back to the beginning, to the moments when difference first became visible, to the experiences that taught us we were not quite like everyone else. For many, it starts in the family, not always in obvious ways, not always through neglect or rejection. Sometimes it's subtler than that. You're the quiet child in a loud family, the sensitive one in a household that values stoicism, the one who asks questions no one else seems interested in answering. You feel the mismatch early, even if you can't name it. Your rhythms don't align with theirs. Your needs feel inconvenient. Your way of being in the world feels like a disruption to the established order. And so you learn, consciously or not, that to be loved is to adapt. To be accepted is to become less of who you are. Attachment theory helps us understand this. Children who grow up in environments where their emotional needs are consistently misunderstood or dismissed often develop what's called an insecure attachment style. They learn that connection is conditional, that love requires performance, that belonging depends on how well you can read and meet the expectations of others. These children become They learn to scan social environments for cues, to adjust their behavior to avoid rejection, to anticipate disconnection before it happens. And this hypervigilance, this constant monitoring of whether you're too much or not enough, becomes a template, a way of moving through the world that persists long after childhood ends. But it's not always about attachment. Sometimes the difference is neurological. Neurodivergent individuals, those with ADHD, autism, dyslexia, or other cognitive variations often describe feeling like outsiders, not because they lack social desire, but because the social world operates on rules they can't instinctively grasp. They miss the subtext, they misread the cues, they say the wrong thing at the wrong time, or they go quiet when they're expected to speak. And while others navigate social interactions with intuitive ease, they have to consciously decode every gesture, every tone, every unspoken expectation. It's exhausting, and it reinforces the belief that they're fundamentally different, that they're playing a game. Everyone else was born knowing how to win. Then there are the highly sensitive people, those with what psychologist Elaine Aron calls a highly sensitive nervous system. Individuals who process sensory and emotional information more deeply than others. They feel everything more intensely, the harshness of a critical comment, the weight of someone else's sadness, the overstimulation of a crowded room. This isn't weakness, it's a difference in processing. But in a world that often values toughness, speed, and emotional detachment, sensitivity can feel like a liability. And so these individuals learn to protect themselves. They withdraw. They become selective about where they invest their energy, careful about who they let close. And in doing so, they often end up isolated, not because they don't want connection, but because most connection feels unsafe. Sometimes the origin is circumstantial. You move frequently as a child, never staying long enough to build deep roots. You grow up in a culture or community where you're visibly different racially, religiously, economically. You're the scholarship kid at the private school, the immigrant child translating for your parents, the only one in your family who went to college. These experiences create a dual consciousness. You learn to navigate multiple worlds, to code switch between identities, to never fully belong in any single space. And while this adaptability can be a strength, it can also be alienating, because when you're always translating, always adjusting, always aware of your difference, you never quite get to rest. You never quite get to feel at home. What's crucial to understand is this: the outsider identity is often formed not because of a single traumatic event, but through 1,000 small moments of disconnection, moments when you were misunderstood, moments when your way of being was met with confusion or discomfort, moments when you realized that to be accepted, you would have to become someone else. And over time, these moments compound. They shape your expectations. They teach you that difference is something to manage, not celebrate. That belonging requires concealment. That the safest way to exist is to remain slightly apart. But here's what psychology reveals. The outsider identity, while deeply felt, is not fixed. It's a story we tell about ourselves, a narrative constructed from experience, but not an unchangeable truth. Yes, some people are wired differently. Yes, some environments are genuinely inhospitable to certain temperaments or identities. But the feeling of being an outsider often persists, even when circumstances change, even when you find people who accept you, even when you achieve success, build relationships, create a life that looks, from the outside, perfectly connected. Because the real challenge isn't finding belonging, it's believing you deserve it. It's dismantling the internal narrative that says you're too much or not enough, too strange or too boring, too intense or too withdrawn. It's learning to see your difference not as a flaw to be corrected, but as a perspective to be valued. And this requires something difficult. It requires grieving the childhood or adolescence where you weren't seen, weren't understood, weren't given permission to be exactly who you were. It requires acknowledging the pain of always feeling adjacent to belonging without letting that pain define your future. The outsider identity has roots, but roots can be examined, understood, and sometimes, with time and compassion, even transformed.